Lieutenant Marcus Cole had been alone on the jungle moon of Vareth 7 for 11 days. His hands were cut and bleeding from climbing through the thick red vines that covered everything on this world. His uniform was torn in a dozen places, and he had not slept more than a few hours at a time since the crash. The colonial transport ship, Endeavor, had been a good ship with a good crew. Marcus had served with them for 3 years, traveling between Earth's colony worlds and carrying supplies to the outer settlements. It was simple work, honest work, the kind of job that let a man send money home to his daughter every month. Then the Cathari. Raiders had appeared out of nowhere. The attack had lasted only minutes. The Cathari were a warrior species that believed strength was the only law in the universe. They had torn through the Endeavor's shields like they were made of paper. Marcus remembered the screaming, the fire, the way the ship had broken apart around him. He remembered grabbing onto anything he could find and throwing himself into an escape pod just before the reactor exploded. He was the only one who made it out. The escape pod had crashed into the jungle of Vareth 7, a moon that no one had bothered to colonize because nothing useful grew here and the weather was terrible. Marcus had crawled out of the wreckage with a broken rib, a twisted ankle, and enough emergency supplies to last maybe 2 weeks if he was careful. He had been very careful. Every night, he built a small fire using the dead wood that fell from the massive trees. Every day he searched for water and tried to figure out if any of the strange fruits hanging from the vines were safe to eat. He had gotten sick twice from making wrong guesses, but he had survived. Humans were good at surviving. It was perhaps the only thing they were truly great at compared to the other species in the galaxy. The Luminari were smarter. The Gorvan were stronger. The Cathari were faster. But none of them could match humans when it came to pure, stubborn refusal to die. On the 12th night, Marcus sat by his fire and ate his last ration bar. He had been saving it, hoping that a rescue ship might come, but no one was coming. No one even knew he was alive. He chewed slowly, trying to make the tasteless block of nutrients last as long as possible, and thought about his daughter back on Earth. Her name was Sophie, and she was 12 years old. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness. When Marcus had left for this last voyage, she had hugged him tight and made him promise to come back. He intended to keep that promise, even if he had to walk across the entire galaxy to do it. That was when he heard the sound. It was not a normal jungle sound. Marcus had learned all the normal sounds over the past 11 days. This was something else, something that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The fire seemed to dim, as if something was pulling the light out of the air itself. Marcus stood slowly, his hand moving to the small knife he had salvaged from the escape pod. He knew it would be useless against most predators on an alien world, but holding it made him feel better. The creature that emerged from the shadows was nothing like anything Marcus had ever seen. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, towering over him like a living nightmare. Its body was covered in scales that seemed to shift and move, changing color from black to deep purple to something that hurt to look at directly. 6 limbs supported its massive frame, each one ending in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through metal. Its head was long and angular, covered with thin tendrils that moved constantly, sensing things that human eyes could not see, but it was the eyes that Marcus would never forget. They were not really eyes at all, just 2 pools of absolute darkness set into the creature's skull. And yet somehow those dark pools radiated an intelligence that was almost painful to witness. Marcus knew what this was. Every spacefarer knew. The Void Reaper. The stories said it was the last of an ancient species, a predator so perfect that it had hunted entire civilizations to extinction. The Gorvan Empire had sent 3 battle fleets to capture it, and none of those ships had ever returned. The Cathari, who feared nothing, called it a death god and refused to enter any system where it had been sighted. The Luminari, the oldest and wisest species in the galaxy, simply called it the end of all things. It had found him. Marcus should have run. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to hide, to get away from this monster that could kill him 1,000 different ways before he even knew what was happening. But he did not run. He could not have outrun it anyway, and something in those dark eyes told him that running would only make things worse, so he did something strange instead. He looked down at the half-eaten ration bar in his other hand, the last food he had in the world, and he held it out toward the creature. The Void Reaper stopped moving. Its tendrils froze in place. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fire crackled between them, and somewhere in the jungle, a nightbird called out in fear. Then the creature tilted its head, a gesture so human-like that Marcus almost laughed despite his terror. He took a step forward, still holding out the ration bar. His hand was shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I do not have much," he said, "but I am willing to share." The Void Reaper studied him. Marcus could feel something pressing against his mind, not painfully, but like a gentle touch, testing to see what he was made of. He did not resist. He let the creature see his fear, his loneliness, his desperate love for a daughter he might never see again. And then slowly, the deadliest killer in the galaxy did something it had not done in a million years. It sat down across the fire from him and waited. Marcus lowered himself back to the ground, his legs shaking so badly that he could barely stand anyway. He broke the ration bar in half and tossed one piece toward the creature. It did not eat it, but it watched with those dark eyes as Marcus ate his own half. They sat there together through the night, the human and the monster, watching the fire burn down to embers. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. Something had changed in the galaxy that night, something that would take years for anyone to understand. A bond had been formed in the most unlikely of places, between the most unlikely of partners, and it had all started with a simple offer of food. When the sun rose over the jungle of Vareth 7, Marcus Cole was still alive. And for the first time in millennia, the Void Reaper was no longer alone. The days that followed were unlike anything Marcus Cole could have imagined. He had expected to die on Vareth 7, alone and forgotten on a jungle moon that nobody cared about. Instead, he found himself sharing his campsite with the most feared creature in the known galaxy. He decided to call it Shade. The name came to him on the third morning. When he watched the creature move through the trees without making a single sound, it did not walk so much as flow, its massive body somehow passing through the thick vines and branches without disturbing them. Light seemed to bend around it, making it hard to see even when Marcus was looking directly at it. Shade seemed like the right name for something that lived in the spaces, between shadows. Communication between them was difficult at first. Shade did not speak with words. Its species had never needed words. Instead, it pushed images and feelings directly into Marcus's mind, like watching a movie playing inside his own head. The first few times it happened, Marcus fell to his knees with the force of it. His human brain was not designed to receive information this way. The experience left him dizzy and sick, but humans were good at adapting. That was another thing they were better at than most species in the galaxy. By the end of the first week, Marcus could receive Shade's thoughts without pain. By the end of the second week, he could send simple images back, though doing so gave him terrible headaches that lasted for hours. Through this strange connection, Marcus learned the truth about the Void Reapers. They had not always been monsters. Long ago, before any of the current civilizations had risen to the stars, the Void Reapers had been guardians. They protected the younger species from threats they could not handle on their own. They hunted the things that lurked in the dark spaces between galaxies, the things that even now nobody talked about. They had been heroes, but the younger species had grown, and as they grew, they became afraid. The Void Reapers were too powerful, too strange, too different. The coalition of fearful empires had decided that anything they could not control must be destroyed. The war had lasted for centuries. The Void Reapers, despite their power, had never wanted to kill the species they had once protected. They held back, hoping that the younger races would see reason. But mercy was seen as weakness, and the attacks only grew more fierce. In the end, only Shade remained. For 10,000 years, Shade had wandered the stars alone. It had watched civilizations rise and fall. It had seen wonders and horrors beyond human understanding. And through it all, it had trusted nothing and no one. Because trust had only ever brought pain, until Marcus Cole offered it half of a ration bar. The gesture had confused Shade. The creature had scanned Marcus's mind, expecting to find fear, hatred, or greed. Instead, it found loneliness that matched its own grief for lost friends, a burning love for a child waiting on a distant planet. It found courage wrapped around a fragile body, determination that refused to break despite everything. Shade had never encountered anything like it. On the 15th day, everything changed. Marcus was gathering water from a small stream when he heard the familiar whine of Kethari hoverbikes. He dropped to the ground immediately, pressing himself into the mud and hoping the thick vegetation would hide him from the sensors. 6. Kethari warriors landed in a clearing about 100 meters away. They were hunting him, Marcus realized. The raiders must have picked up the escape pod's distress signal and decided to finish what they had started. He could hear them talking in their harsh, clicking language. They were spreading out, searching the jungle in a systematic pattern. They would find him within the hour. Marcus looked around desperately for Shade, but the creature was nowhere to be seen. For a terrible moment, he thought he had been abandoned. Maybe the bond he thought they had formed was just his imagination. Maybe Shade had simply been curious about the strange human, and had now lost interest. Then the screaming started. Marcus would never be able to describe what he saw next. Not really. Shade did not fight the way other creatures fought. It did not charge or pounce or attack from hiding. It simply existed in one place and then existed in another, moving through dimensions that human eyes could not perceive. One moment, a Kethari warrior was raising his plasma rifle. The next moment, he was on the ground, his weapon sliced in half by claws that had come from nowhere. Another warrior turned to run and found Shade already in front of him, his dark eyes staring down with cold judgment. It was over in less than a minute. 6 of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, soldiers who had killed humans by the thousands, lay scattered across the jungle floor. None of them were dead, Marcus noticed. Their weapons were destroyed, and their bodies were injured. But they were all still breathing. Shade had shown mercy. The creature turned toward Marcus, and for the first time he saw pain in those endless dark eyes. Blue blood was leaking from a wound in Shade's side where a lucky plasma shot had gotten through. The creature had been hurt protecting him. Marcus did not hesitate. He ran to Shade's side and pressed his hands against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The creature's blood was cold, almost icy, and it burned his skin where it touched. He did not care. For 3 days, Marcus stayed by Shade's side. He used strips torn from his own shirt as bandages. He shared his water, even though he barely had enough for himself. He stayed awake through the nights, keeping watch and talking softly to the creature so it would know it was not alone. On the 4th day, Shade's wound had healed. The creature rose slowly, stretching its 6 limbs and testing its strength. Then it turned to Marcus and did something unprecedented. A single word appeared in Marcus's mind, clearer than any image or feeling Shade had ever sent before. It was the first actual word the creature had communicated in over 10,000 years. Partner. Marcus felt tears running down his face, though he did not remember starting to cry. He reached out and placed his hand on Shade's massive head, feeling the scales shift beneath his palm. Partner, he agreed. In that moment, on a forgotten jungle moon, something new was born. It was not quite friendship, because friendship was too small a word. It was not quite family, though. It felt closer to that. It was a bond that crossed the boundaries between species, between minds, between worlds, and it would change the galaxy forever. The salvage ship. Wandering Star arrived at Vareth 7 on a routine mission to collect debris from the destroyed transport Endeavor. Captain Linda Marsh had been doing this job for 20 years, looking through the wreckage of ships and selling whatever she could find. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills and kept her small crew fed. She did not expect to find a survivor. When the sensors detected a human life sign on the jungle moon, Linda nearly fell out of her chair. Survivors from Kethari attacks were rare. Survivors who had lasted almost a month alone on an alien world were almost unheard of. She landed her ship in the nearest clearing and led her crew into the jungle with medical supplies and emergency rations. What she found there would become the most famous story in human history. Marcus Cole stood at the edge of the clearing, thin and tired, but very much alive. And next to him, towering over everything like a shadow given form, was a creature that Linda recognized instantly from the stories every spacefarer knew. "Do not shoot," Marcus said quickly. Stepping between her crew and the monster, "Shade is with me. It is not going to hurt anyone." Linda stared at him like he had lost his mind. Her crew were backing away slowly, their hands shaking as they tried to decide whether to draw their weapons. The Void Reaper watched them all with those terrible dark eyes, its tendrils moving slowly in the humid air. "That thing," Linda managed to say, "is the most dangerous creature in the galaxy." "You named it Shade?" "It seemed to fit," Marcus said with a tired smile. "Now, please, Captain, I really need a ride home. And Shade is coming with me." It took 3 days to reach the nearest human station, and by the time they arrived, news of what had happened had already spread across the galaxy. Someone on Linda's crew had sent a message home, and that message had been shared and copied until it seemed like everyone in known space knew about the human who had befriended the Void Reaper. The reactions were immediate and dramatic. The Gorvan Empire demanded that humans hand over both Marcus and the creature immediately. They claimed rights of vengeance for the battle fleets they had lost centuries ago. The Cathari threatened war if the monster that had humiliated their warriors was not destroyed. The Luminari, usually calm and measured, sent message after message asking how this was possible, how a human had done what no other species had ever accomplished. And the Galactic Council called an emergency meeting. Marcus found himself transported to Harmony Prime, the massive space station that served as the seat of galactic government. He had never been anywhere so large or so impressive. The station was home to representatives from 47 different species, each with their own section designed to match their homeworld. There were areas with crushing gravity for the heavy world species, areas of pure water for the aquatic races, even areas with toxic atmospheres that would kill a human in seconds. Shade stayed close to Marcus through all of it. The creature seemed uncomfortable, surrounded by so many different beings, many of whom looked at it with obvious fear and hatred. Marcus could feel its unease through their mental link, and he tried to send calming thoughts in return. The council chamber was enormous. A circular room with seats rising in tiers around a central platform. Representatives from every major species had come to witness this moment. The air was thick with tension. Armed guards lined every entrance. High Counselor Vethria of the Luminari spoke first. She was ancient even by her species standards, her crystalline body glowing with soft blue light. Her voice echoed through the chamber like wind through chimes. "Human Marcus Cole, you stand before this council because you have done something unprecedented. You have somehow gained control over the entity known as the Void Reaper, a creature that has terrorized this galaxy for longer than your species has existed. The council demands that you relinquish this control immediately." Marcus looked at the ancient being, then looked around at all the frightened faces staring down at him. He took a deep breath. "With respect, Counselor, you are wrong about almost everything you just said. I have not gained control over anything. Shade is not my weapon or my pet. Shade is my friend." The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted in a dozen different languages. Guards moved closer, their weapons ready. Only Shade remained perfectly still, watching everything with those dark, patient eyes. "Silence," Vethria commanded, and slowly the noise died down. "You expect us to believe that this creature, which has killed millions, is your friend. Do you think us fools?" "No," Marcus said. "I think you are afraid, and I understand why. The stories about the Void Reapers are terrible, but the stories are wrong." He stepped aside, gesturing for Shade to move forward. The creature walked slowly to the center of the platform, and the entire council seemed to hold its breath. Then Shade did something it had not done since. Its species had been hunted to near extinction. It opened its mind to everyone in the room. The images came flooding in, too fast and too powerful to resist. Marcus saw hardened warriors fall to their knees. He saw the ancient Luminari covering their crystalline eyes. He saw representatives weeping, screaming, trembling as the truth poured into their minds. They saw the Void Reapers as they had once been, guardians standing between the young species and the horrors that lurked in the darkness. They saw the war, the betrayal, the endless centuries of being hunted for the crime of being too powerful to trust. They saw Shade wandering alone through the cold void of space, year after year, losing hope, losing faith in everything. And they saw Marcus Cole, starving and alone on a jungle moon, offering his last scrap of food to a monster because he could not bear to see anything suffer. When the visions finally stopped, the council chamber was silent. Vethria was trembling, her crystalline form flickering with colors Marcus had never seen before. "We did not know," she whispered. "All this time, we did not know what we had done." Marcus walked to Shade's side and placed his hand on the creature's massive head. "Now you do," he said simply. "The question is, what will you do about it?" No one had an answer, not yet. But for the first time in thousands of years, the Void Reaper was not seen as a monster to be feared. It was seen as a victim to be mourned, and perhaps, just perhaps, as a friend to be made. The galaxy had changed in a single day. And it was only the beginning. 3 months after the council meeting, Ketheri Dominion launched the largest invasion in their history. 2,000 warships descended on human colonial space, their target the peaceful farming world of New Portland. The message from the Ketheri High Command was simple. Humans had proven themselves too dangerous to exist. Any species that could befriend the Void Reaper might one day befriend other horrors, might one day grow too powerful to control. The humans had to be destroyed while there was still time. Marcus Cole heard the news while he was on Earth. Visiting his daughter Sophie for the first time in almost a year, he had been sitting in her school auditorium, watching her perform in a play about the first human colony ships. When his communicator began buzzing with urgent messages, 200,000 people lived on New Portland. Farmers, teachers, doctors, children. They had done nothing wrong except belong to the same species as Marcus Cole. Within an hour, Marcus was aboard a military transport heading for the front lines. Shade had been waiting for him at the spaceport, having sensed his distress through their bond, even from the other side of the planet. The creature had become something of a celebrity on Earth, terrifying at first, but increasingly accepted as stories of its true nature spread. Children would wave at it in the streets. Old women would bring it gifts of food, which Shade would accept with grave politeness, even though it did not need to eat. But now there was no time for politeness. War was coming. The human defense fleet gathered around the carrier constellation, the largest warship humanity had ever built. Admiral Patricia Vance commanded from the bridge, her gray hair pulled back tightly and her face set in hard lines. She'd been fighting the Cathari for 30 years, and she knew exactly how dangerous they were. When Marcus arrived with Shade, the Admiral looked at them with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "I have heard what that creature can do," she said. "The question is whether it can do enough. We are outnumbered 10 to 1. Marcus looked at Shade, and the creature looked back with those endless dark eyes. Through their bond, he felt something he had never felt from his partner before. Anger, cold. Ancient anger at a galaxy that refused to stop fighting, refused to stop killing, refused to learn. "Shade will fight," Marcus said, "but not alone. We fight together, all of us, or we lose." The battle began 3 hours later. The Cathari fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in a massive formation. Their ships arranged in the traditional hunting pattern that had conquered 100 worlds. Their commander, War Master Kethser, had been told stories about the Void Reaper, but he did not believe them. Nothing could stand against the might of the Dominion. He was wrong. Shade launched itself from the constellation like a missile made of darkness. The creature crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds, moving through space as easily as it moved through air. It phased through the hull of the first Cathari battleship without slowing down, emerging from the other side with the ship's main reactor clutched in its claws. The battleship went dark. Shade moved to the next one. Marcus watched from the constellation's observation deck, his mind connected to Shade's through their bond. He could feel what the creature felt, see what it saw. The Cathari ships were massive up close, bristling with weapons and armor. Any one of them could have destroyed the entire human fleet, but they could not touch Shade. The creature flowed between dimensions, appearing and disappearing faster than sensors could track. It tore weapons from their mounts and ripped holes in engine compartments. It moved through the Cathari fleet like a ghost of vengeance, leaving disabled ships and confused warriors in its wake, and it showed mercy. That was the part that surprised everyone, including Marcus. Shade could have killed thousands, could have torn every ship apart with its crew still inside. Instead, it targeted systems rather than people. It left life support intact. It gave crews time to evacuate before destroying their vessels completely. This was not the Void Reaper of legend, the mindless killer that had haunted the galaxy's nightmares. This was something new. This was a creature that had learned compassion from a human who had shared his last meal with a stranger. The human fleet pushed forward behind Shade, taking advantage of the chaos. Their ships were smaller and weaker than the Cathari vessels, but they were faster and more agile. They worked in perfect coordination, protecting each other's flanks and focusing their fire on already damaged enemies. More importantly, they worked with Shade. When the creature paused to regenerate its strength, human ships formed a protective screen around it. When Cathari fighters tried to swarm it, human pilots dove in to draw them away. It was not the behavior of people using a weapon. It was the behavior of soldiers protecting a comrade. The Cathari had never seen anything like it. War. Master Kethzar watched his fleet, being torn apart, and felt something he had not experienced in decades of warfare. Fear, real, genuine fear. Not of the Void Reaper alone, but of what its partnership with the humans meant. If a species could befriend that nightmare, what else might they be capable of? He sent the signal to retreat, but it was already too late for many of his ships. The flagship's weapons were destroyed, its engines crippled, its hull breached in a dozen places. Shade hovered outside the bridge viewport, those dark eyes staring directly at the War Master. Kethzar knew he was about to die. He accepted it with the dignity expected of a Cathari warrior, standing straight and facing his doom without flinching. But the death did not come. Instead, Shade pressed an image into his mind. It showed humans and Cathari standing together, not as enemies but as allies. It showed a galaxy where strength was not the only law, where understanding could exist between species that had every reason to hate each other. Then the creature turned and flew back to the human fleet. Leaving the War Master alive to think about what he had seen, the Battle of New Portland was over. The remaining Cathari ships fled into faster-than-light travel, leaving behind the wreckage of their grand invasion. 200,000 colonists looked up at the sky and saw something they would never forget. A monster and a man, fighting side by side, proving that the galaxy could be better than it had always been. Admiral Vance found Marcus on the observation deck after the battle. Shade curled around him like a protective shadow. "I have commanded fleets for 30 years, she said quietly. "I have never seen anything like what happened today. That creature could have conquered the galaxy if it wanted. It could have destroyed us all." "Why does it follow you?" Marcus smiled, exhausted but satisfied. His hand rested on Shade's massive head, and he could feel contentment flowing through their bond. "'Cause I asked nicely, Admiral. Because I treated it with kindness when everyone else treated it with fear. Sometimes that is all it takes. Sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is just being decent to someone who has forgotten what decency feels like." Vance shook her head slowly. "You humans," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "You really are something else." Marcus just smiled. Shade rumbled in agreement, a sound that shook the deck plates but somehow felt like a purr. The war was not over, not yet. But something had changed. The galaxy had seen what was possible when fear gave way to friendship, and nothing would ever be quite the same again. In the years that followed the Battle of New Portland, the galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The story of Marcus Cole and the Void Reaper spread to every corner of known space, carried by traders and travelers, diplomats and dreamers. It became a legend, but unlike most legends, The people in this one were still alive to prove it was true. Marcus became a symbol of humanity's best qualities. He traveled from world to world as an ambassador, bringing shade with him wherever he went. At first, alien species would react with terror when the massive creature appeared. Guards would draw their weapons. Children would hide behind their parents. Crowds would scatter in panic. But Marcus would simply smile and wait. He would tell the story of how they met, how he offered his last meal to a lonely monster, how Shade had protected him, and he had nursed Shade back to health. He would talk about fear and trust, about how the galaxy had spent thousands of years running from the Void Reapers, when all they really needed to do was sit down and listen, and slowly, minds began to change. The Luminar were the first to officially apologize. High Counselor Vethria gave a speech before the full Galactic Council, her crystalline voice breaking with emotion as she acknowledged what her species had done so long ago. The ancient Luminari had led the coalition that hunted the Void Reapers. They had told the younger species that the Guardians were monsters, and the younger species had believed them. "We were afraid," Vethria said. "Fear made us cruel. Fear made us into the very monsters we claimed to be fighting. Today, we ask for forgiveness, though we know we do not deserve it." Shade listened to the speech through Marcus's mind. When it was finished, the creature projected a single image to the ancient Luminari. It was a picture of a hand reaching out, open and empty, offering pay. Ace Vethria wept. Her tears were diamonds that scattered across the council floor like stars. The Gorvan Empire came next, their warrior culture struggling to admit that they had been wrong about anything. But even the proudest Gorvan commanders had to acknowledge what Shade had done at New Portland. The creature had shown mercy to enemies who would have shown none. That kind of strength was something Gorvans could respect. Most surprising of all was the change in the Kethari. War Master Ketzer returned to his homeworld a broken man, his fleet destroyed, and his beliefs shattered. But as he told the story of what he had seen, of the image Shade had pressed into his mind, something shifted in Kethari society. Their entire culture was built on the idea that power was the only thing that mattered. But Shade was the most powerful being they had ever encountered, and Shade had chosen mercy. Shade had chosen friendship over conquest. If power itself could choose compassion, then perhaps the Kethari had been wrong about everything. It took years. But eventually a new Kethari delegation appeared at the Galactic Council. They came not to threaten or demand, but to talk. They came to learn how to be something other than what they had always been. And then the others began to emerge. Shade had always believed it was the last of its kind. For 10,000 years, it had wandered the stars alone, certain that every other Void Reaper had been hunted to extinction. But it was wrong. The others had been hiding, scattered across the galaxy in the deep places between stars. They had watched in silence as civilizations rose and fell. They had given up hope that anything would ever change, until they saw Shade standing beside a human. The first one appeared in orbit around Earth, causing panic throughout the entire planet. Military ships surrounded it within minutes, weapons ready to fire. Marcus and Shade rushed to meet it before anyone could do something foolish. When Shade saw another of its kind for the first time in 10,000 years, the emotion that poured through the bond nearly overwhelmed Marcus. Joy, disbelief, grief, for all the years of loneliness. And underneath it all, a hope so fragile and precious that Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. The new arrival was smaller than Shade, its scales a deep blue rather than shifting black. It circled around Shade slowly, tendrils reaching out to touch, to confirm that this was real, that it was not alone anymore. More came over the following months. A dozen at first, then 24, then more than anyone could count. They emerged from hiding places throughout the galaxy, drawn by the news that one of their kind had found something they had all thought impossible. Friend Marcus watched as Shade was reunited with its people, and he felt a strange mixture of happiness and sadness. He had always known that Shade was something ancient and powerful, something that did not truly belong in the human world. He had been afraid that once Shade found others of its kind, it would forget about the fragile human who had shared a ration bar with it in a jungle so long ago. But Shade sensed his fear. It always did. And it sent an image into his mind that made everything clear. It showed the two of them sitting by a fire on Vareth 7, alone and afraid, and somehow finding each other anyway. It showed all the adventures they had shared, all the battles they had fought, all the quiet moments when they had simply existed together in peace. And it showed the future with Shade and its people spreading throughout the galaxy, but always with a place in their hearts for the humans who had taught them how to trust again. Partner, Shade said in his mind. Always. Marcus smiled and wiped his eyes. Always, he agreed. 5 years after he had first been stranded on that jungle moon, Marcus Cole finally went home for good. He returned to Earth with Shade, to the small house where his daughter, Sophie, had grown into a young woman while he was out changing the galaxy. Sophie had been terrified of Shade when she first saw it, a reaction that Marcus completely understood. The creature was still a nightmare given form, massive and dark and utterly alien. No amount of stories could prepare someone for the reality of standing in its presence. But Shade remembered what Marcus had taught it. It approached Sophie slowly, carefully, its movements gentle despite its size, and it held out a flower in one enormous claw. Picked from the garden it had noticed she liked to tend. Sophie stared at the flower, then at the creature, then at her father. "Dad," she said, taking the flower with trembling hands, "you really are the craziest person in the galaxy." Maybe, Marcus agreed, but I am also proof that the galaxy does not have to be what it has always been. We can be better. We just have to be willing to try. Shade rumbled in agreement, a sound that Sophie would grow to recognize as laughter over the years that followed. Because Shade did not leave. It stayed on Earth, visiting Marcus and his daughter regularly, becoming a strange but beloved part of their family and across the galaxy. In places both bright and dark, others learned from their example. Species that had feared each other for millennia began to talk. Walls that had stood for centuries began to fall. The Void Reapers, once hunted and hated, became something new. They became protectors again, as they had always meant to be, standing beside the species they had once been forced to hide from, all because one tired. A hungry human had offered his last meal to a stranger. A statue was eventually built on New Portland, the center of the capital city. It showed a man and a creature standing side by side, looking up at the stars. The plaque beneath it read simply, "The deadliest killer is not the one with the sharpest claws. It is the one with a closed heart. Open yours and change the galaxy." And beneath that, in smaller letters, were words that would become humanity's unofficial motto throughout the cosmos. Our greatest weapon has always been an open hand. Marcus Cole lived to see that future. To see his daughter grow and have children of her own. To see a galaxy transformed by the simple choice he had made on a jungle moon so many years ago. And when he finally passed, old and content and surrounded by love, Shade was there beside him, as it had been for so many years. "Partner," the creature whispered into his mind one last time, always and somewhere in the stars. The rest of the Void Reapers sang a song of mourning for the human who had taught them how to hope again. A song that echoed through the void and reminded the galaxy that kindness was the most powerful force in the universe. It always had been. It always would be.